Welcome to lecture number 17. Today we're going to continue talking about prosocial behavior and altruistic behavior as a subset of prosocial behavior. A couple of announcements that are more relevant to the face-to-face class, and this is a bit out of date. Just to remind you that if you were in the face-to-face class, we would do a little bit of a discussion around altruism. Particularly, we do an altruism debate. Also, at the end of the lecture today, there's a few slides that pertain to the debate on altruism, and in particular they are focused on the Batson study that looks at the role of empathy in altruistic behavior, according to Batson and his colleagues. So in the last lecture, we looked at different goals for prosocial behavior, and we left off right around the part where we would discuss managing self-image and or managing our moods and emotions. And those two particular pieces are really quite at the core of the debate about whether or not we actually help others for the sake of helping others alone, or whether we help others primarily or in addition to the desire to help ourselves in some way. So what about managing our self-image? What does that mean exactly? Well, it basically means that we are trying to have a good self-image, maintain a good self-image, or enhance our self-image, and that includes self-esteem. And so this anecdotal evidence here, or it's more of a correlational study actually is a better way to describe it, tells us that people who were prosocial in their behavior, they helped others, in particular those that helped the Holocaust victims, still showed elevated self-esteem compared to those who hadn't helped the Holocaust victims, even 50 years later. So having a significant helping experience had a positive impact on this person's or these people's self-esteem for pretty much most of their lifetime. Another indicator here in terms of connecting helping behavior to self-image or identity is that the research that shows that a person who is volunteering in a prison rehabilitation program was more likely to continue volunteering if they felt as though that volunteer work was an important reflection of who I am. In other words, if a person incorporates helping behavior into their sense of self, their identity, that is going to be a persistent influence on the likelihood of them helping in the future. There are three different levels of research here. We'll look at some studies that look at each of these different levels. On the personality side of things, we're going to look at personal norms and religious codes, which are still personal but have some connection to culture. We'll look at some situational influences, such as when people are labeled as being helpful, or if a person is in some way encouraged by the situation to focus on themselves. And finally, we'll switch it around a little bit and look at the interaction between person factors and the situation to see if there's some kind of interacting influence on helping behavior or receiving help. So personal norm. Personal norms are distinguished from cultural norms in that they're more particular to the individual. A personal norm is an internalized belief or value that combine to form a person's inner standards for behavior. And I've given as example, I have a personal norm that I should give blood to the blood bank. Society in general has a norm that you should be helpful, but there's not really like a strong norm out there that everyone should give to donate blood to the blood bank. But for me personally, I have had several bouts with the hospital. I have some friends that are connected to the medical establishment, and so for me personally, giving blood is something that I believe is important, and it influences my blood donating behavior. It's a bit of an interesting story behind religious codes. When people initially researchers initially looked at helping behavior and religiosity or religious affiliation, they were surprised to find that there wasn't as strong a connection there as they hypothesized. And this research here emphasizes the important difference that they were not attending to. So that is that people who define themselves as highly committed to their spiritual beliefs are, compared to those who are less committed, twice as likely to volunteer help to the needy. The key thing here is the perception or the belief that one is highly committed. Basically, it's distinguishing between those people who say, yeah, I'm Christian, or yeah, I'm Muslim, or yeah, I'm Mormon, and those people who are saying, yes, I'm highly committed to my Christian faith, or I'm highly committed to the tenets of Islam, or I'm highly committed to the Mormon teachings, or whatever it is. That the idea is that sincere commitment is what distinguishes between those people who are religious and help and those people who are religious and don't help as much. This next slide shows a very clear connection between the expression of commitment and the percent of people who are helping the needy. It's not the exact same one that's in your textbook, but it does show the same kind of pattern. Now, what about labeling and self-focus? You might remember from earlier in the course we talked about how other people's perceptions of us can impact our identity and our behavior. And here's a good example. If you label a child as kind and helpful, this labeling increases his or her later willingness to donate prizes to other children. So this is a laboratory study where essentially the researchers randomly assigned children to different labels, and they found that those that were labeled as kind and helpful actually kind of took that label on and behaved in a way that was consistent with it. Now, what about self-focus? Many of us have in our identity a sense of the importance of helping. We might think of ourselves as a helpful person, and if that's the case, then we're more likely to behave in a way that's consistent with that if we're reminded of that part of ourself. So there's a variety of ways in which researchers have situationally induced self-focus. And some examples include putting a mirror in the room where a research participant is being monitored and their behavior, their helping behavior in particular, is being measured. Having a video monitor displaying the image of the person, the research participants, asking a person to pose for a photograph, or even hearing their own voice on a recording. These are all ways that bring a person's attention back to themselves, and if a person has the values of helping and if other factors line up, then that self-focus can actually increase helping behavior. But let's look at some of the other factors that might influence helping or not helping with the presence of self-focus. So on this slide, what we see is a progression from left to right that incorporates a person's situational and self-judgments and predicts whether or not a person will be helping. So first of all, we have a person who's been induced to have a self-focus in some way. And when they turn around and metaphorically or literally look at themselves, they might first ask, are my problems big or small? And this is essentially asking, do I have the capacity to provide help? And if the answer to that is no, I'm currently overwhelmed, I'm having difficulties in my life, then they're really unlikely to provide help. On the other hand, if they're feeling like they have basically got things are going well for themselves, they might consider helping the person. There, the question is the victim's need prominent? Is it pretty obvious that the person needs help? If the answer to that is no, then less likely to be providing help. If the answer is yes, then the person asks, is the victim's need legitimate? And this is kind of an interesting question, and maybe needs a little bit more explaining. Some research by Bernie Weiner basically took people like yourselves, students, and presented them with a helping scenario. And the helping scenario was this. They said, Joe here needs to borrow a week's worth of class notes before the final exam, is really stressed about not being able to pass the final exam, and he really needs your notes. And you're feeling pretty protective of your notes, but you also maybe want to help Sam out. Now, research participants faced with that situation were then assigned to one of two conditions, and one condition explained Joe's need for the notes because he had been helping out his sick grandmother. There was no one else to help his grandmother, and she really needed a lot of support, and so he basically cut class for a week so that he could help his grandmother. The other research participants were presented with the explanation that Joe didn't feel like going to class, so he cut class, and that's why he didn't have that week's worth of notes and desperately needed them to study for the final. As you might imagine, the second case is not seen as a legitimate basis for the need for help, and participants in that condition were much less likely to be willing to loan their notes to Sam than those that were in the condition that saw that Sam had helped his grandmother and he'd really responded to something that was kind of beyond his control other than choosing to help his grandmother. So let's say that the victim's need is legitimate. Then we go on and ask whether this internal focus has led a person to be reminded of the value of helping. And if they're a person who values helping, then they'll go on and provide help. If they're a person who thinks, helping is, just not really doing anybody any favors because everyone should be strong and help themselves, or something to that effect, then they're actually less likely to help. Now let's turn it around a little bit. Sometimes people who are in need of help are actually less likely to help. They're actually less likely to ask for help. So here are some age differences. So the age is the personality or individual difference part, and in the situation is people being ready to provide help, and the interaction is that a person's request for help is to some extent a function of how old they are. So the very young are quite happy to ask for help. If you've been around a little kid, they're always asking you for something. But as children get a little bit older, particularly around age 7, they start to realize that asking for help may reflect poorly on their self-esteem or their sense of competence and mastery of their environment. So they begin to ask for help less. Even if they need help, they will probably not ask for it because they want to feel independent, they want to feel accomplished. And that trend, flattens out after a while, but then later, much later in life, at about age 60, there's another marked drop in asking for help. And again, as you might imagine, that's about feeling competent or not feeling feeble. Those people older than age 60 are unwilling to ask for help because they think it suggests that they are not fully capable adults. There are also some gender differences in help asking behavior, and as you might imagine, it's somewhat consistent with the stereotypes. Males are generally less likely to request help than females are. They don't want to appear less than competent, they want to maintain dominance, and so that's one of the reasons that they don't display vulnerability. And because it is related to stereotypes, that difference between males and females in terms of the propensity or willingness to ask for help is strongest among those males who are strongly identified as a masculine sex type. Now, managing our emotions and moods. There are a variety of experiments and theories that are associated with the experimental results in this section that really speak to the possibility that helping behavior is primarily motivated by a desire to manage our feelings. So the managing of emotional arousal in emergency settings is described by the arousal cost-reward model. In this view, observers of suffering help the others to relieve their own personal distress. In other words, if you're seeing that someone needs help, their suffering actually irritates you, it bothers you. And so, according to these folks, we will help in an emergency if we feel the negative arousal, like we're feeling upset and distressed or anxious by the other person's protests and feelings of pain or feelings of need. And We will also help in that emergency situation if we're feeling that negative arousal and other conditions suggest that helping will alleviate the unpleasant feeling. So just as sort of a silly example, imagine you're in a supermarket and the kid in front of you just starts bursting. You're in the checkout line, and the kid right in front of you starts bursting out crying and complaining that they're really, really, really hungry, and mommy, I need a candy bar, I really want a candy bar, and throwing a fit about how hungry they are and how much they need this candy bar. And the mom is saying, I can't afford it, we only brought enough money for these groceries. And this kid's whining and crying is really bothering you. So you have this negative arousal. And then you think, hey, I've got $1 for this stupid candy bar, and I know this kid will just shut up if he gets a candy bar. So you throw down $1 for the Snicker bars, and you give the kid a candy bar. This is a situation where the arousal cost reward model is predicting your helping behavior. It's not that you really want that kid to be helped, it's just that you want to stop hearing all this whining and this bother that you hear from this kid crying, carrying on. So as a flow chart, we have the following. As moving from left to right, we see another person who's in a clear need of aid in sort of an emergency situation that causes us to be agitated and bothered and irritated. If the cost of helping is relatively small, it's not going to be a big deal for you to help. That's going to increase the likelihood of helping. If the rewards are large, meaning, wow, you're going to be so relieved when this kid shuts up, then that increases the likelihood of responding with help. If the arousal is strong, it's really getting under your skin that this kid is screaming and crying, then that will increase the chance of helping. And finally, some research indicates that if you feel kind of a connection with that person that needs help, you're more likely to help. That little part of the model is the one that I think sort of fits least well in this arousal cost reward model, but it's there anyway. Now, what about non-emergency helping? Remember when we distinguished earlier in the course between emotions and moods, we said that moods tend to last a little bit longer, and we could be more conscious of them and respond to them in a thoughtful kind of way. Well, with that in mind, we can manage our emotional or mood feelings in non-emergencies by using helping behavior to boost our mood. So as it reads here, the idea with the mood management hypothesis is that people use helping behavior tactically or strategically to manage their moods. And this is based on the assumption that throughout life we've learned that helping others can lead to rewards. Those rewards are generally social in nature. Other people will praise us for being helpful, but we also reward ourselves. We think of, what a good person we are. It improves our sense of identity and our self-esteem. And so this helping behavior makes us feel good. And then we can use that feel-good moment and reflecting on that feel-good moment as a way to manage our moods. I just want to note that in the textbook, I think it's about 310, 311, there's some interesting, very modern research there that shows that brain imaging research on increased activation of the reward centers of the brain. So anyway, the research that shows participants have been put in a sad mood by an experimental condition are more likely to provide help to a confederate in the situation of the experiment than participants who have been put in a neutral mood. So that's an example of how the mood management hypothesis is verified by experimental research. But we'll talk a bit more. So yes, let's look at some research focused on personality or person variables and then situation, and then look at their interaction. And that gourmet and gourmand is a really pretty complicated experiment, but we'll go slow and we'll manage to get through that. So let's take a look here. So presence of sadness. There's a variety of ways that researchers can induce a person to feel sad, at least temporarily. And some examples of the kinds of manipulations they use, person goes into the psychology laboratory and the researcher asks them to reminisce about unhappy experiences in their lives, or they might have them read depressing statements, like 10 statements. They might ask them to take a test, like an intelligence test, or solve a puzzle, and repeatedly have them fail at that task until they feel pretty down and receiving some kind of harm. All of these things reliably put people in a pretty bad or sad mood. So to highlight how this can affect our helping behavior, we have first the mood manipulation that I described, but in addition to the sad, we also have a happy manipulation. You can imagine some of the things that they might do to make a person happy, or they just have a similarly engaging kind of activity that doesn't manipulate mood at all. So we have three types of mood that are manipulated: happy mood, sad mood, or just a neutral mood. And then research participants are given an opportunity to help. And in this study, there were two different variations on the helping behavior. One focused on the benefits, and the other focused on the amount of effort or cost involved in providing those benefits. So first with the benefits. The low benefit or small benefit was providing help for a little league. And sure, it's great to help kids with their sports, that's nice, but the high benefit was considered or was manipulated by providing benefit to the American Cancer Society, which, saving lives is probably a little bit bigger a benefit than helping kids with baseball. In terms of the cost of helping, people were given the opportunity to either sit at a donation desk and wait for people to come to them and willingly provide donations, or the high cost or high effort variety of helping was going door to door, knocking on people's door, and asking for donations. And if you've ever done any door-to-door sales, that's a pretty effortful, pretty difficult task to do. So let's look at the data for this study. So on this slide, the main message is that being in a happy mood encourages people to help. It's almost as if being in a happy mood just makes people feel more inclined to be helpful. And that's the comparison between the happy columns on the left and the neutral column on the right. Those are the people in the neutral mood. The color of the bar indicates the combination of whether it was low cost and high benefit, or high cost and low benefit, etc. And the legend for that is up on the top there, but just to remind you its connection to the previous slide, let's walk through it. A low cost would be sitting at a donation desk, and a low benefit would be sitting at that donation desk for Little League donations. So that's the blue chart bar there. All the way on the other side of things, we have the low cost, that's the sitting at the donation desk, for the high benefit, that's collecting donations for the American Cancer Society, that's the yellow bar. And then we have the other variations, and you can figure that one out. So let's look over there at the sad mood and see how people in the sad mood responded. So the first thing to probably note is that overall people in the sad mood didn't help very much. In fact, people in the sad mood who were faced with a high cost, that is going door to door, low benefit, that is collecting donations door to door for Little League, they were actually very unlikely to help. That's that little red bar there. Those people sort of in the intermediate positions were about as likely as the people in the neutral mood to help. But the interesting interaction, that is the combination of the person-situation combination, is the yellow bar there, which basically suggests that people who are in a sad mood use low-cost, high-benefit helping to improve their mood. Okay, so the interpretation of this, according to the researchers, they've used kind of a French word to explain this. They say that those people in the sad mood are like gourmets. They have hearty appetites, and they're really willing to put in a lot, but picky taste. They'll help a lot more if the opportunity is a good one, but they'll help less if it's a poor opportunity. On the other hand, people in a positive mood act more like gourmands. These people are having hearty appetites for helping, but they don't really care about how they help. So again, their interpretation is that people in a positive mood seem to view themselves and their environments in generally happy terms, and in those generally happy moods, they are willing to provide help. Now let's turn to that question of whether pure altruism exists. Just as a reminder, we did this definition in the last lecture, but pure altruism is behavior that benefits another person intentionally for no external or internal reward. The only reward is helping the other person. There's nothing that you are expecting in the way of praise from others or rewards in a monetary sense from others, nor is there any expectation that you're going to feel happier or have a better opinion of yourself or anything like that. The egoistic explanation for why we might provide help that might look like altruism is that we actually are helping for selfish reasons. We often do so to relieve our own suffering. We've talked about a variety of ways that might be explained: mood management, arousal, cost, reward model, those kinds of things. And then Batson offers an alternative and says, no, pure altruism does exist. It exists when we experience empathy for the person who needs help. In other words, when we take the perspective of another person, we become selflessly concerned with their welfare and thus behave altruistically. So this is what he would describe as the empathy-altruism hypothesis, the presumption that when one empathizes with the plight of another, we will want to help that person for purely altruistic reasons, only to help the other person. And the basis for this is empathic concern, the compassionate feelings that are caused by taking on the perspective of the needy other. So let's look at how Batson breaks this down. I'm sorry about the little, let's see here. Unfortunately, this click to add thing here in the back, I can't get rid of that for the moment. It's distracting. But anyway, this is a table that's also in the Batson article, which is available on the Blackboard site, which I presume you've downloaded and read. So according to this, we have a basic set of explanations or motivations for helping behavior and whether it is instrumental or ultimate. According to an egoistic account of altruistic behavior, or what appears to be altruistic behavior, they argue that we relieve another person as an instrumental goal. By instrumental, we say we are doing that particular behavior to actually serve a less obvious goal. The instrumental goal here is relieving the other person's suffering, but we only do that for the ultimate goal of receiving some sort of self-benefit. So in the example of the kid screaming for the candy bar that I gave earlier, you help the kid, but you're only doing that as a way to get them to shut up so that you can help yourself from having that splitting, ear-piercing sound get out of your ears, and you no longer will feel that negative arousal from that kid whining. So your ultimate goal is your own benefit. The instrumental goal is just to help the kid to get to that ultimate goal. According to the altruistic account, you're relieving the other person's suffering is your ultimate goal. You feel for that kid. You remember being a kid yourself. You know how hard and awful it is to be hungry and really want something and you can't have it. So you've identified with that kid, you feel for that kid, you have empathy for that kid, and you help just to help the other kid, or just to help that kid, not to help yourself. An unintended consequence might be that other people might praise you for that. You know, they might say, oh, that was so sweet of you to buy that kid a candy bar. You might also feel relieved, but this isn't the intended consequence, it's an unintended consequence. Now, if we were in class together, I might have gone a little bit further here and asked you whether pure altruism exists, and there's a series of slides here that highlight Batson's research, as I said, this is explained in the Batson reading, so I'm not really going to go into it here, but essentially says that when we have empathy for another person, we're more likely to help, even if it would be easy for us to escape that person's presence and therefore avoid the negative feelings that we might have when that person is asking for help and appearing to suffer. But according to an egoistic alternative, and this is also highlighted in the text in the reading, he would argue that empathy causes the observer to feel kinship for the victim, and that basically taps into our basic selfish motivation to serve myself by serving those who share my genes. And it's really hard to disprove that, and so some people have argued that Cialdini's kind of setting the bar too high. And that concludes this lecture for today.